Our population is aging rapidly, so how do we provide care when older people need it? Find out now on AgeWise. Hello, I'm Ed Rosenberg, Director of App State's Gerontology Program. Welcome to AgeWise. America's older population is in the process of doubling. The parents of the baby boomers are in their 70s and older. The older people get, the more support they need. Who provides it? You may not believe it, but 80% of elder care is provided informally by family and friends. How can we enhance the lives of older people and their adult children caregivers? Francess Hall is a founder of ACAP Community, Adult Children of Aging Parents, and Dr. Jane Everson is a co-founder of ACAP Community. I'm glad you're here. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Jane, what is ACAP Community?
Well, quite simply, Ed, ACAP Community is a 501c3 nonprofit that Francess and I established, frankly, out of our own personal needs. We are both adult-child caregivers. Initially, I was caregiving from a distance for both my mother and father, Francess for her mother, and we realized that we just needed more information. We needed more resources, and we also knew we would benefit from support, from talking with each other and with other people about what it was like to be an adult-child caregiver.
Well, Francess, you're one of the founders of ACAP Community. What is your story, and why did you decide to do something beyond just focusing on your own personal issues?
My mother moved from the home she grew up in Alabama to move to North Carolina about 6 years ago at the age of 89. The transition was really difficult for her, and quite honestly still is. It's a huge move for someone at that age. So when she moved, I was working full-time and realized that I really needed more resources, more information. I wanted to help her, but I didn't know how. So I started asking people to come, and really just as a support group. And then it evolved to having actual monthly programs and having speakers come, because we realized, golly, we're doing a lot of supporting each other, but there were a lot of questions that we had, and we didn't know where to go for the answers. So that's how ACAP actually began. I stopped work about a year and a half, 2 years after starting ACAP at the workplace, and there had already been a lot of conversation about it's coming into the community. So it came into the community. Jane got involved at that point, and we have continued to have monthly programs since then of all sorts of different issues about aging and adult-child caregiving.
Well, Jane, you're listed as a co-founder, but obviously at some point you met Francess, and you mentioned a little bit about your background, but what was your caregiving situation? What were some of the issues that you felt you might need some help dealing with?
Well, I think our experiences are both very similar as well as very different. When I first became involved with ACAP, both my mother and my father were alive. They live 400 miles away from me, so I was caregiving from a distance. And my father at the time was in his mid-80s and very healthy, but experienced a rather sudden difficulty and had to be hospitalized, and I realized that I really didn't have all the information I needed. So I started going to programs that Francess was offering informally through ACAP, learned a lot, met Francess, we spent a lot of time talking, and it was really good to have the support. And we both realized that, gosh, if there's two of us who have this need and more people are coming, we can either just take care of ourselves, or we can say, by golly, there's other people out there who need what we can do, and we're going to help them get the information they need.
You know, there are so many programs out there that claim to provide things that older people need and are happy to take older people's money to do that. But ACAP Community, as Jane mentioned, is a nonprofit. And what would you say, Francess, is really the mission of ACAP Community?
The mission really is to help to support adult-child caregivers as we care for our parents and for ourselves. Two prongs of that, and we talk about that what ACAP provides is information, resources, support, and community for those of us who are adult child caregivers.
And if someone wants to access ACAP, you do have a website, is that right? And what is that website?
That website is www.acapcommunity.org.
So acapcommunity.org.
Correct.
And they can
Correct.
find all kinds of information about the program in Hickory and just general information for adult children of aging parents wherever they are.
That's right.
Jane, ACAP holds monthly meetings in Hickory. What goes on at these meetings? How are they organized?
Well, the first thing we did, Ed, as we began to establish ourselves as a nonprofit was to do a national survey of other adult child caregivers to see if the information Frances and I thought we needed to know, and people in Hickory were telling us they needed to know, was really shared across the country. So we came up with a curriculum of 22 different programs and growing that we offer on a monthly basis. So we rotate through those programs. Each program is 90 minutes, and that 90 minutes includes a professional, and a professional could be a professional who's a caregiver or a professional who might be a doctor or an attorney or some other kind of background. They come in, they share their wisdom about their topic and about being a caregiver, and then there's time to ask questions, and then there's just time to share and to commune with other people who are caregivers.
So there is some informal social support, but this is not just a meeting for people to sit around and hold hands and feel good. There's actually educational information, how to find resources, better ways to do different things that are organized in a consciously developed curriculum. Is that right?
That is correct. We recognize that in order to be better advocates for our parents as well as for ourselves, that there were some core areas that we all needed to have some information and resources in.
And what would those core areas be?
Well, certainly they're organized by 6 different modules, and one is on medical and health information. So we look at common prevalent medical and health issues that are typical as people age. We also have financial and legal aspects of aging, so we look at estate planning. We have a unit particularly on Alzheimer's, because as we know, that's an unfortunate growing population. We have a module on housing and transportation. So for example, we talk about retiring from driving and how we have that difficult conversation with parents. We have a module on psychological and physical aspects of aging, and that includes things such as anxiety and depression and what that looks like in the aging. And then we have a module on family dynamics, where we talk about everything from managing guilt as a caregiver to working with our siblings to share the joys of caregiving.
So there are all kinds of things that could concern adult children who are caregivers for
right.
aging parents. And I would think that you two both meet almost everyone who comes through the door to any of these monthly meetings. If you had to pick out one of those areas, one of those curriculum areas that's the most common one, where people need information. I need information about taking away the keys. I need information about accessing health care and so on. What would be one of the most common issues that people have where they're looking to ACAP Community for help?
Well, I think the 2 categories of programs that have the highest attendance really have to do with Alzheimer's and dementia. Huge, 15 million people in the country are dealing with that. So that's a huge issue and a huge need. The other probably is the program on legal aspects, you know, the 5 legal documents everyone needs. So those are the 2 really probably the programs that we see consistently the highest number of attendees.
Okay. So adult children who have aging parents with Alzheimer's or related dementia, or adult children who are concerned about the legal situation of their aging parents would benefit from coming to ACAP community meetings in particular.
Right, right.
Let's talk about the Speakers Bureau, because you also have a Speakers Bureau. How many speakers are there? What kinds of things can they talk about? And how could someone arrange to have an ACAP community speaker come talk to their church or their group?
Oh, sure. Well, at this point, the Speakers Bureau, you're looking at the Speakers Bureau. Jane and I go. And yes, we do presentations. We are being invited more and more to make presentations in our area as well as outside our area. So really all they have to do is to let us know, and we can certainly talk with them about dates and places and the group and the presentation itself.
Okay, I think that's a wonderful resource to have available. I'm sure mostly you would do that locally around the Hickory area where you're based, but you can probably travel moderate distances
Sure.
as well.
Absolutely.
And in addition to the Speakers Bureau, you two also did a TED Talk.
That's right.
How did that come about? And I mean, that must make you pretty famous. How did that come about?
Well, I think it came about because we recognized, as I said, that if this was a need for us, and everywhere we go to talk about having speakers, or even when we're just on the road and we may be at a restaurant, everybody will say, oh, well, let me tell you about my mother, or let me tell you about my father-in-law. So we realized that the need we have is shared by just about every middle-aged adult out there. Almost all of us are caregiving in some capacity for a mother, a father, in-laws, and in some cases all of the above.
Well, they even talk about, some people talk about that caregiving for an aging parent is sort of a rite of passage now for a middle-aged adult.
Well, going back to the TED Talk, how did that happen? Did you contact somebody? Did they contact you?
Well, the TED Talks program has something called TEDx, which are local organized events. And we are very fortunate in the Hickory area to have a TEDx. So when they were looking for speakers, we decided that we had a story to tell, and we wanted to talk about our own personal caregiving experiences, but also share some of the, I wouldn't even say wisdom, maybe lessons that we're learning as caregivers that we thought might be helpful not only for people in Hickory, but also for anybody who was viewing the TEDx talks.
Can people call up this talk someplace and watch the two of you? How would they do that?
It's on our website, which Francess mentioned earlier, and it's also on YouTube, and you can also go to the TED Talks. And in fact, if you Google caregiving and aging, last time I looked, we were the only talk that came up when you did that.
On YouTube?
On TEDx.
On TEDx.
On TEDx. Fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
But wait, as we say, there's more. You folks also do podcasts. And what do you do, and what kinds of topics are available, and how could people access them?
All kinds of topics. What we're trying to do, and really have been pretty successful, is that the podcasts really parallel the curriculum that we have and a lot of the programs that we're doing in the Hickory area. And in fact, you have been one of our podcast interviewees. So the podcasts cover all kinds of issues, a lot of what Jane had mentioned with the curriculum, but more details, things like driving and aging, aging in place, Alzheimer's,
Hospice, using
yes.
a pharmacy. One thing that works really well with the podcast, we've found people using if they come to one of the monthly programs, but perhaps they have a sibling or another family member who lives in another state that can't come to the ACAP Hickory program, they can say, you know, I was at this program last night, no, you couldn't come, but I'd really like you to go to the website and listen to the podcast. So we hope it helps with family dynamics as well. Or if you came to the podcast like a student at a university and you didn't take any notes and you want to go back and look at it, you can just listen to it later and get some additional information.
And I think that's a good resource too, because you have those archived on the website. They're always there. What kind of, I know, you know, ACAP community is for adult children of aging parents, but as you've described very nicely, there are all kinds of issues ranging from health and medical issues to psychological issues to social engagement kinds of issues, legal, financial, taking away the keys from mom or dad. What kinds of, aside from, okay, adult children with aging parents, what category of adult children most need something like ACAP community?
I'm not quite sure what you mean.
Well, what would be the most common problems? Are we talking, you'd mentioned legal, and dementia must have been the other one, because I just forgot.
Alzheimer's and dementia. I think the people that we know who either attend the programs or have looked at the information online seem to be people, very honestly, pretty much like Jane and I. Adult children really cutting across the spectrum of where they are in that journey, maybe at the very beginning, maybe a little farther along. People certainly of all ages, all kinds of different scenarios in terms of the parent either everywhere from living in the home with them all the way to being in a skilled care facility or a memory care facility. What ACAP really does is that it really provides information for them, for people wherever they are, and then moves them along in that.
We really like to make sure that people come not because there's a crisis. We know that that's often how people do get involved with ACAP, but our goal is that you're caring for your aging parent and for yourselves by gathering a lot of information. So we really encourage people to come month after month, even if perhaps they don't need that topic this month, they probably will later on in their journey.
How do you make people aware that something like ACAP community exists? How do you generate awareness?
At this point, we have almost 600 on a database that we send an email to every month. We also do news releases, but probably at this point that one of the biggest ways that people know about it is just word of mouth, friends telling each other.
And I think that's obviously very important here. Well, once people find out that there's this kind of program, then how do you develop positive attitudes about it? In a lot of areas, not only small towns, but particularly in rural areas, there's an ethic of independence, that we take care of our own, that we don't talk about our problems, and to access some kind of outside services almost seems like we're admitting that we're not able to do what we're supposed to be able to do, what we're obligated to do. Do you ever encounter that, and how can you change people's attitudes about accessing a group like ACAP Community?
Yeah, I'm not sure that we've faced that problem, although I think that some of the people who come to ACAP are not as diverse in backgrounds as we would like, and perhaps that's one of the reasons we wrestle with that a great deal with certain communities in Hickory, trying to get them to come to the table. So often we go to them instead. So I think that's something we're kind of wrestling with. But I think the other thing is that we really focus on education. We make it very clear that we're there to give you information, not to tell you what to do, not to tell you that you should be doing this or you shouldn't be doing that, but to give you information so that you can make more informed decisions as you advocate. So we've really been very fortunate that people are hungry for the information and really not hungry to complain.
Well, let's say that I find out that there's a program like ACAP Community, and I do a little talking. Maybe I come to one meeting and I say, okay, you know, they're not too threatening. They're not telling me what to do. Maybe I can use some of this information. But how do we know that it works? How do we know that ACAP is successful? Any information on that?
Yeah.
Well, yes, we've worked very hard to answer that question, and I think the answers are always evolving. But we survey people certainly at the end of every program to make sure they were satisfied with that program and with that speaker. But once a year, we also do a full demographic survey where we ask people to give us their backgrounds so that we have a better understanding of who's coming. And then we ask them, as a result of coming to ACAP programs, how do you feel about your life as a caregiver? Do you feel like you have more information? Do you feel like you have more resources? Do you feel like you have more balance at home and at work? And overwhelmingly, we are finding two things. People feel very good about the information, and they feel like they have more balance, less anxiety. They're better able to carry on as caregivers and at work. And we also find that the more ACAP programs they attend, the more likely they are to feel those benefits. So that's very good news for us.
It certainly is. So you have some real data
Yes,
that
we
people
do.
are in fact benefiting from this. Perhaps another indication of the benefits of ACAP community would be that you've just opened a new chapter up in Pennsylvania, which
Right.
isn't exactly Hickory, North Carolina.
That's right.
How did that come
That's
about?
right. We were invited, Jane and I were invited to come up to Pennsylvania and do a presentation up there. And in fact, it was not the area where the new chapter is, but in Pennsylvania, they had a consortium. The State College found out about the presentation we were doing and invited us to come back and do a presentation for them, specifically to talk about developing a chapter there. That from the beginning they saw the value of ACAP. And this is, about 9 months later, and the chapter there has formed, and they have just begun offering their programs. So we're very excited.
That's great. And I would think that there'll be more such chapters in the future
Correct.
because as people live longer, as adult children have to take on caregiving responsibilities, this is happening all over the country, right? It's not just North Carolina, it's
That's
not
right.
just Pennsylvania. The nation is aging and aging very rapidly. I'm reminded of something that Rosalind Carter, the wife of President Jimmy Carter, said about caregiving, and that is that there are only 4 kinds of people in this world: those who have been caregivers, those who currently are caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers. That can be sort of a frightening statement to confront. Is that true?
I think it's absolutely true.
So we will need a lot of caregivers.
We will need a lot of caregivers, and the more information we have about ourselves and the more experiences we have caregiving, the better we will all be.
With the aging population, we have a lot of issues that we never thought about before. For instance, you'll have parents in their 90s, 100-year-old parents, who thought that either they would die earlier or their children would take care of them. And then you have a child in his or her 70s who predeceases the parents.
That's right.
And then the parents don't know what to do about caregiving.
Right.
Are there some unusual situations you run into at the meetings? Do people tell you unusual stories, something you say, whoa, I never heard about that before?
Oh, I think we hear about all kinds of different scenarios. I think one of the things, as you're talking about that Jane and I really realized is that at a senior expo, that we had a mother who was in a wheelchair and would have been, I guess, in her 90s, but the daughter who was caring for her was in her 70s. And so all that age can mean, and health issues, and just energy and stamina to take care of the mother, that was really striking for us. And we suspect that we will see more and more of that sort of scenario.
We can have situations where the caregiver herself is elderly,
That's right.
dealing with their own problems,
That's
and
right.
and elder care can be extremely stressful. It can affect
Very.
people's health, their emotions. They may have to cut back on work hours or quit work. There can be financial strains. You've already talked about legal issues. And then you put Alzheimer's on top of that. It's a particularly difficult caregiving choice. What would you say to people to let them know that it's okay to look for support groups if they're caring for an aging parent? What would you like to leave people with if there was a final message?
I think for me the final message would be that we are in a very big boat. There are 10 million of us adult child caregivers in the United States. We need the information, we need the resources, we need the support and the community in order to take care of our parents and ourselves.
Jane, how about you?
And I would say to really function in that boat, you have to have support, and you have to have friends, and you have to sometimes recognize that you've just got to laugh at the situation, because there is joy along the way.
And that you can't always do it by yourself.
That's right.
And that there's no real expectation that you should
That's right.
Right.
have to do this
That's right.
by yourself. And again, with the aging country, this, I'm not necessarily saying it's a problem, it's a challenge. It's a challenge. And you folks through ACAP Community are developing one form of a solution to that challenge, especially when we have the stereotype that, oh, older people are in nursing homes or assisted living facilities. Most of them are not.
Right.
And if most of them need help, it doesn't come from government programs or hired home nurses. It comes from family members and friends and people you go to church with. So I think the work that you're doing is tremendously important and will only become more important in the future. Again, your website is acapcommunity.org. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I think that's just wonderful. Well, I want to thank you for joining us today. Our guests again have been Francess Hall and Jane Everson, co-founders of Adult Children of Aging Parents Community, ACAP Community. Thank you very much for watching. Please join us next time as we continue our exploration of positive aging on AgeWise.